Moving on, I request Professor Chauhan, President of the Indian Sociological Society, to deliver the welcome address.
All India Sociological Conference being organized at the Vellore Institute of Technology, Vellore. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome each one of you to this conference. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Thiyagarajan, the Minister. On behalf of the Indian Sociological Society, I thank the entire team of VIP Vellore for giving the Indian Sociological Society an opportunity to come to Tamil Nadu and organize the conference here, the 48th All India Sociological Conference. Society, that it is very important for us to be more inclusive, more democratic, more diverse. 28 probably the faculty members and
Madam?
A study of the case on the coastal belt of Thiyagarajan, North Malabar, published in the journal Coastal Studies in Society.
But what it has also led to is extreme disparity. Those of you who are students of macroeconomics or global trade will know that almost always deregulation, the lifting of barriers, internationalization will lead to increased wealth creation and increased aggregate GDP growth rates and international wealth creation. It will almost always also lead to increased disparity unless you have conscious government programs and very tailored and nuanced steps intended to prevent that from happening. This rapid increase in wealth will also result in rapid increases in disparity. It's an automatic, it happens in parallel. In fact, such increases will exacerbate the otherwise somewhat hidden weaknesses in the nature of democracy. And what are those? Primarily because it is very hard in a democracy, even the best democracies of the world, to separate money and politics. So if you have unprecedented wealth creation, that wealth will lead to a further subversion of the natural weakness of democracy through the application of wealth in one-sided ways that removes the notion of a level playing field, that creates arbitrary barriers to entry, that protects the strongest and leaves the weakest where they are. This is even further compounded by the fact that we now live in an era of what they like, what they see, and through that, with the natural reduction of attention spans that is happening as the glut of online information increases, then you will end up with greater polarization because people will be fed more and more of the same content that reinforces their limited understanding of something and excludes them from being fully informed and seeing a diversity of views. The consequence of all this, I think, is a deterioration in the nature of politics and a clear deterioration in the nature of political leadership. If you look at the country or you look at the world today, you have people who are very good at polarization, very good at winning elections, very good at divisive mathematical calculus, but there's almost a dearth of statesmanship. Think around the world today. Are there global leaders who have the capacity to speak with moral authority against something that is profoundly, fundamentally against human nature or human values, like the murder of innocent civilians? And there's very few people who are either willing or able to do that. And when they are willing to do that, they have actually diminished their own status by doing very kind of divisive politics focused on the lowest common denominator in their own countries. So the more internal politics gets degraded and debased to this kind of polarization and kind of the more the global community suffers, because there are only local chieftains and everybody's worried about their home ground, their home turf, and they're not able to really play at a global level. And we have this hugely hyper-integrated global economy with very little global thought leadership or moral leadership or statesmanship. So it's a pretty bleak picture, actually, if you ask me. But is there a way forward? And I think as I was coming down, I was thinking about 7 or 8 things which I think would make a profound difference. And I think the first, if you look around the country and certainly look around the world, is to profoundly improve the quality and access to education. So if you look, not only is it about who has access to education, it's about how much education they have access to. If you look at country to country, state to state, city to village, any of these differences, you find that where education is emphasized, particularly elementary education, and where it is universal, boys and girls get the same access, all communities get access, compulsory education is either enforced or incentivized through things like free breakfast, free lunch. These are the areas where you actually start creating the capital, the human capital that is going to be the pool from which you're going to develop tomorrow's workers, tomorrow's leaders, tomorrow's statesmen who are better than today's. The good news is I think many places of the world are realizing that. I was on a tour of 6 or 7 universities in the US last month. I took my youngest son, who's an 11th class student, and we stopped at very prestigious universities, Chicago, Brown, MIT, Harvard, Yale, Columbia. And in Chicago, I was very surprised to learn that that's where the birth of the field of sociology happened, otherwise seen as a very strong and technical school in things like biology or biological sciences or economics. The notion that the degree of sociology or the field of sociology actually was first born at the University of Chicago, funded by Rockefeller's money back in the day. And at my own school at MIT, they are so focused now that the students should learn adequate subjects in humanities. So they require that whatever specialization you're doing in one of the best technological universities in the world, you have to be taking at least 4 or 5 core courses in the humanities early in your education. So I think the nature of education, the universality of access, and the quality of the study to include things like humanities rather than just the skill that you get to employ, I think will create better citizenry, and that might be the single biggest hope for creating a better tomorrow and working our way through these crises. The second, I think, is a focus on reducing inequality to the extent possible. Now, in any capitalist model, it's very difficult to eliminate inequality, but if you look around the world, those societies that have succeeded to some extent in keeping inequality to a lower level, keeping the Gini coefficient lower, tend to have better outcomes. I can talk about that internationally, but I can also talk about that domestically. If you look at a state like Tamil Nadu, one of the reasons we do relatively well and have relatively high per capita consumption, even as a function of the total economy, compared to other advanced states like Maharashtra or Gujarat, Tamil Nadu has a very high per capita consumption equation because we have lower Gini coefficient, we have greater spread of the wealth. As scientists and as administrators, I think the third thing we can do is collect a lot more data and analyze it. And if we are smart, we pre-program in certain limits or certain actions based on the data. So for example, in the old days, we were not collecting nearly enough data because we didn't have collection efficiency and we didn't have infinite storage like we do today. But if we can collect the data and analyze it, we actually understand what is happening. It's very hard to fight inequality if I don't know how much inequality there is. And not a lot of the economy is visible to us. In Tamil Nadu, we do a lot of that. I think as a country, as a world, we need to do a lot more. We have arrangements with people like MITS, with JPAL. We do surveys beyond the NSSO. We look at extent of housing access, extent of penetration of welfare programs, and this data will help us. And if we set automatic limits or automatic actions, so when I was in finance, for example, after 30 years of not actually indexing the government's revenues to inflation, we started doing that. Think about it. Most governments in India today, all our expenses are automatically or statutorily indexed to inflation. The DA increases in the payrolls and pensions, or the cost of running programs or subsidies is automatically indexed to inflation because that's the world we operate in. But most of our income is fixed. We have no indexation to inflation. Many advanced economies figured out how to solve this problem years or decades ago. Nobody in India had done it. In Tamil Nadu, under my chief minister, when I was in finance for the first time, we started indexing some revenues to inflation so that the state's revenues keep up with its expenditure, which is automatically indexed in place, inflation index. And if we do that, we can keep the inequality down by spending these revenues rather than going into a debt trap. The fourth thing I would say is institutions like universities, like research labs, like think tanks, to take these data points and do analysis and suggest adaptations and solutions to how we can maintain a more equitable and a more just and humane society. The fifth thing I would say is what all advanced economies have shown us, which is to devolve power to the local government so you can have local self-governance, that is from the center to the state to the local bodies. Because the odds of any elected official being held accountable by the voters substantially increases when the ratio is 5 or 10,000 is to 1. If you're a local body councillor, in a village, it's probably 1,000 is to 1 in Tamil Nadu. In a city, it's probably 8,000 or 10,000 is to 1. By the time we come to an MLA, it's about 2.5, 3 lakh is to 1 in Tamil Nadu, probably 4 lakh is to 1 in UP. And by the time we come to an MP, it's probably 15 or 20 lakh, 25 lakh is to 1. The odds that that MP can be held accountable by those voters is exactly 0. So you're not fostering democracy at all. You're fostering an authoritarian shift of power towards a party leadership, towards a brand, towards a place where money can create a jet stream, where any candidate can be elected, and you're no longer representing the people's concerns. So the more you have the scale of Singapore, Australia, Canada, where 30,000 people, 40,000 people have an elected representative, the more likely those elected representatives actually are held accountable and therefore behave in a way that they will be able to answer the electorate. We don't have anywhere near that issue. The next thing I would say is to create level playing fields and transparent and efficient markets so that it is not a rigged insider game, and because it's perceived to be a rigged insider game, many people choose not to participate, and you have highly inefficient outcomes where a few grab everything. The Chancellor gave many of the statistics that I myself was going to talk about, which is the extent of concentration of wealth, grossly exaggerated in the hands of a few, which means clearly that we don't have that have managed to maintain a middle class, a middle tier of enterprises, MSME enterprises, a middle level of industries or institutions or universities, rather than only a few big ones. Of course, we all need some big ones, but if you have only 3 or 4 big ones, nothing else in the middle, medium, small, and then you only have like small family businesses, you have a highly inefficient market structure. You take places like Germany, where there's a vibrant industrial economy, they have a huge MSME base that actually has world-class skills of manufacturing, of robotics, of innovation in companies that employ 300 people, 500 people that do 200 million a year in business, 50 million a year in business. This middle tier is crucial. And if you look again, relatively speaking in Tamil Nadu, one of the great advantages we have is that we have many more small and medium enterprises, micro enterprises. They create jobs at a much more rapid scale. It costs about 1.5 lakh rupees of capital to create a job in an MSME sector. and it costs about 30 lakhs of capital to create one job in heavy manufacturing at least. These days that ratio is more like 1 crore or 1.5 crores because of the automation. Now there will be second order, third order OEM and indirect employment benefits, but still the ratio is not in the same frame, 1.5 lakh to 1.5 crore. You have to create 100 times the secondary and tertiary jobs to be as employment efficient as the MSME sector. If we allow this kind of concentration to go on and this slide to everybody only watches their own corner, their own pocketbook, and you allow this exaggeration and concentration, what you're going to find is that the benefit of the commons gets eroded all the time. And the rights of the commons and the future of the commons are at stake. And I think the clearest example of that is how little progress we're able to make on reducing the impact of greenhouse gases, trying to combat climate change, and trying to preserve the environment, which ought to be everybody's priority. It ought to be the first common good for all citizens of all countries, rich and poor, around the world, ought to be trying to keep environmental sustainability. And yet we have COP after COP after COP, and we don't really seem to be making progress. The ability to come to focus on the common good seems to be lost in parochial concerns, whether that's individual industrial parochial concerns or whether that is, country by country, fossil fuel country compared to green energy country, the battle is not even. So these are some of the thoughts I had about the crises, the causes, and what could be potentially solutions. But I think such conferences are vital. I'm very happy that all of you are here today.